Okay, so I'm here with David Campbell. David, thank you for joining us.
Great pleasure.
We're going to have a little recital and Yamaha event later on today, but I wanted to grab you whilst you were here. And just first of all, I wanted to talk to you about the clarinets that you're now using. So just tell us a little bit, how did you come to end up on the CSG?
It's a long story really, but I run the Aberystwyth Festival, Music Fest. It's been going 30 years, and I was very pleased when one of the artists that we were using last year, and this year indeed, Lisa Nelson, the flute player, she said, "Oh, I can come, and I expect Yamaha can help with my fee," and I was delighted to get this sponsorship. So Natasha Homer came from Milton Keynes headquarters with a display of flutes and various paraphernalia. And I was thanking her at the end of this day when the flute was featured, and said, "Thank you so much for coming all this way, and can we talk about some sponsorship in the future as well?" And she said, "I suppose you've tried our clarinets, have you?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, it must be 8 to 10 years since I have tried any." And I promised on the spot that I would go back to London and try some, which I did. And the first blow, I thought, this is amazing. All my preconceived ideas about Yamaha being perhaps well engineered but somewhat bland or a little bit lacking in soul, that went out of the window, because the sound was really warm and very even over the whole range, and everything you need from a clarinet really. And the other thing was that everything worked. I suppose that the model I played before, I'd been on buffet for a total of 35 years, and I mustn't slag them off. They were fantastically kind to me and gave me all sorts of opportunities, and I still think that their clarinets are great in many regards, but one's always looking for something that's better and easier to play. And for example, on the Divine clarinet that I played before, I've always felt that there were certain things that didn't suit my hand so well. I've got quite small fingers, and I play my B and E key down here very much sort of on the edge of the finger, on the Divine and the Tosca with the small key here, sort of half size key here. Every time I went for a B, I was actually catching it. So in the end I had it removed because it was more trouble than it was worth. And yet there were a few times when at the end of a Brahms sonata on a bottom F, or the last note of the Mozart Clarinet Quintet, where the bottom F in the slow movement is the same as the cello D, or should be, and you always feel very, very low. And yet I hadn't got the opportunity to raise the pitch of that. On this Yamaha system, I've got the one with the extra key on, and that raises the bottom F, or slightly on the E. It's not quite as effective, but certainly on the F it raises up about an eighth of a tone. But the advantage is you can get to the F, and if it is flat in that context, you can nudge it on as much as you want. On the buffet system, you had to think, I'm going to play a bottom F a bit sharper, and actually reach for it. And then sometimes it wasn't, it was a little bit too sharp compared with what you wanted. This seemed a much better way of doing it, and it's nicely tucked at the back. It doesn't interfere with how you play.
That's it, yeah. So it's deployed with the thumb just on the back, a bit like a low C on a bass clarinet.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and so that worked better. The angle of this extra E flat key,
which is commonly in the way as well.
Yes, that just seemed to suit my hand better. And as soon as I picked it up, it just felt like home. I don't know whether I suppose my first buffet was an R13, and then I played R13 Prestige and so on. So maybe it's more like the layout of that. The Divine, because the scale had been changed apparently, it meant that there were tiny adjustments to the position of the holes. And I found, having only played them for 2 or 3 years, If I went on holiday, for example, and didn't touch the instrument for a week, when I went back, I was sort of missing things.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel quite.
You
like
know the answer there. Don't go on holiday. No.
Well, don't tell my wife that. Yeah, but
It's
yeah,
interesting that I think it's a few interesting things that you said that I can pick up on, if you don't mind. Is maybe the fact that when you play something, you can really feel at home on it immediately. But for a lot of people who aren't maybe so experienced, who aren't used to trying lots of different clarinets, because in your time, obviously you've been playing professionally and lots of teaching and all the rest of it, you must have played hundreds of instruments. But what would you recommend for people who are trying a new instrument for the first time? You know, maybe they've not tried wooden instruments before. What are you looking for that's tangible and what's not tangible in terms of just that feel-good factor? How would you test a new clarinet?
well, I suppose that these days the sort of the ideal sound for a clarinet has changed since the time when I was at college, where if you didn't sound like Jack Brymer on a Symphony 1010 wide bore instrument and quite a lot of vibrato, you possibly wouldn't stand much chance if you went for a job audition, you know, and didn't sound that way. These days it's a much more, well, I suppose to start with, there are many more makes if you count all the independent ones as well. People play a variety of things. There's not a sort of uniform model to play, but also with things like Spotify and the ability to hear not only current recordings from all over the world, but historic ones as well. It's sort of, in a way, brought the national styles of playing much closer together. You know I'm weird, but I used to sit around with my friends at the Royal College of Music way back when in the early 70s, listening to symphonies, and we would guess the orchestra from the tone of the clarinets.
Wow.
We'd say, oh, that's Berlin, or oh, I think that might be Vienna, you know.
Yeah.
And we'd sort of try and have a little test for each other. And you could, even with the British orchestras, there were certain ones that you could spot because, unlike, say, the RPO, where they were all on Symphony 1010 clarinets, Jack McCaw, who was one of my teachers, was one of the first buffet players in the Philharmonia and so on. And you could sort of fine-tune your hearing and really hear these differences. These days, I think things have got much closer together. And
is that good or bad, though? From a musical point of view? I
think that there are other elements of personality that one can possibly put into your playing. But, you know, the thing that surprised me, I'd had maybe 2 or 3 attempts to get off my 1010s, because although I loved the sound that they made, certainly in those days, on a good day it was like driving a classic car, and everything, you know, just purred along and you thought, this is great. But there were times when you couldn't find a reed, and when the hall got very hot or something and your pitch would rocket, and you'd feel like an alien in an orchestral environment. And I think the thing that really made me change was just the intonation more than anything. When I was in the middle of a tour and I suddenly felt completely out of my depth. We had a different flute player who religiously played at 440 pitch, and my pitch had gone way higher, and even with pulling out I was just nowhere near. And I thought, right, that's it. And I went out on a weekend off and got some new buffets on approval. And then on the Monday, when we resumed the tour, the number of people who came up to me, you know, people I'd never spoken to before, second trombone players, would come and say, fantastic solo tonight, David. And they were obviously judging my playing by other criteria. Things like the intonation, things like the evenness of sound, and the way it blended with the other woodwinds and the brass, for example. And I think one can easily get seduced into thinking, oh, this is my signature sound, you know, and I've got to play this brand to sound like this. And the silly thing is, that's not the case. I say, for one thing, other musicians are judging you on different criteria. the other weird thing is that I bumped into someone that I was at school with many, many years ago, who's had a very illustrious career in the Navy. And we met up after many, many years, and he said, "Oh, I listened to your broadcasts and your recordings and so on. So you're still playing the 1010s you had when you were at school." And, you know, despite all the changes and with working for Boozy and Hawkes and then Buffet over many years now for Yamaha, I must have changed clarinets every 2 or 3 years. And yet to him, I still sounded like me. Yeah. And I think that's the test that...
I think that's an important thing though, isn't it? Because if you're believing it's too, your sound is too attached to the gear, it can cause other problems of worrying. And we've all been there, and I'm sure you've seen professionally people swapping mouthpieces and all sorts going on in a orchestra environment, and that's always a bit of a worry. Whereas, like you say, your sound has to maybe go with you, you know, across whatever the gear is. And I suppose from a testing point of view, I would take from what you've said, you know, maybe it's the core things you've got to check. Is the tangible things are the tuning, you know, does it play nicely in tune? Does it feel good under the hands? And that's going to be different for everybody. People might find things more comfortable, less comfortable, you know. And but one thing I wanted to pick up on the CSGs again, if we can. You've got the gold-plated key model there. This is a question we get asked a lot in the shop. What difference does the plating make? And it's a difficult one because each instrument is different anyway. So it would be very, without stripping all the keys off and doing each one like that. But what did you feel, because you've tried a few now, what was the difference for you?
Well, the day I chose these a year and a half ago, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind. I tried this model, exactly the same thing but in silver plate, and I thought this was a much warmer sound. So do you want me to put my head on the block now?
Yes, let's have a look.
So let's see if I can. This is a brand new CSG.
Yeah, this is pretty much straight out of the box, and
it hasn't got the lever on this one. You could, that's an optional extra, but along with a sunroof and a sat nav.
That costs more. And now let's have a little go with the Hamilton plating.
Maybe it's my 1010 upbringing, but I always hanker after that sort of round sound, even though I don't use much vibrato these days. There's something nearer the Jack Brymer spectrum than the sort of French school of playing, but it's got a lovely warmth to it.
Yeah, it's that density, I think, is what I would, from just sat in this position. It's obviously when you play and when you hear is two slightly different things, and we all hear differently, but yeah, it feels to me there's a slight density.
And it's interesting, I do quite a lot of session work, and when I have been in with one particular sound engineer that I work with a lot, he said it's fantastic on the oscilloscope on this one. The spectrum is very full. All the harmonics are very present. Some other models I've tried sort of filter out things and a bit toppy or a bit bass heavy or whatever. This is a really good spread over the whole range. So
I found them very even as well, and consistent as well. We've had a lot now. And I remember when this model first came out, we sold lots and lots. You know, we were talking earlier about some of the London players that adopted onto them, and the main thing we found actually was the consistency was, you know, really good.
Yeah, sure.
But great. Well, maybe we can have a few more notes just to play us out.
Yeah, why not?
We'll let him off.
Well, I just
thank you for your time.
Had to play this yesterday.
What better way to go out? Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.